Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. We've got an incredible guest today, and I'm really excited for the insights and ideas they'll be sharing. There are so many practical learnings from the conversation that will make a difference to you, your team, or organization. If your organization is interested in a workshop on this topic of the podcast, feel free to get in touch via our website, yellowwood.ie. If you want to support our podcast, and you'll find a link to our Patreon in the podcast description. Thanks in advance for listening and your support. Now, let's take a different path to success. Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. Today's topic is Don't Say how to communicate effectively. And joining us is Michael Chad Hoeppner, who is CEO of GK Training and is on a mission to help people speak well when it matters most. With nearly 20 years in the field, Hoeppner has taught at Columbia Business School and coaches thousands of professionals around the world. His corporate clients include 3 of the top 8 global financial firms, 1/3 of the AM Law 100, 2 of the 4 US professional sports leagues, former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, and multinational tech, pharma, and food and beverage companies. Michael, thanks so much for joining the Workplace Podcast today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
I must say, I really enjoyed the book. This is jam-packed with information, insights, tips, Lego drills. I'm a big fan of Lego exercises. This book packs it all in. So for our listeners out there, if you want to improve the way you communicate, to deliver, present, this is the book for you. So with all that, Michael, the title of the book, Don't Say and I am very conscious about how I'm speaking right now. And it's actually something you let the readers know, something about thought suppression. So my understanding of this was like an embedded command to the brain. So to actually take the action you're looking to avoid, like don't get stressed or don't forget or don't make mistake. Thought suppression, what is that?
Yeah. Well, let everyone listening off the hook. I am not the police. I am not judging and critiquing your ums at all times. The title is supposed to be a bit of a trick to your point about thought suppression. We can't do it. So if you say, don't be stressed, don't say as soon as you hear that don't, your brain is obligated to do the thing you're asking it not to do, because it activates what's called distinction. You have to distinguish from the rest of the known universe. So the point of that title is it's a bit of a trick. And in fact, you're right. As soon as the readers turn the first page, in the preface, they find out that it is a trick. I hope they pick it up because they've heard that advice countless times before. They've probably told themselves that advice before. But in the book, you get the recipe for how to actually avoid saying to change these habits, to change the communication habits that are frustrating for you, but it's not through thought suppression.
This is something I've experienced as I try to master the way I communicate over the years. So I'm 15 or 16 years in business now. And with that, I had certain verbal tics or certain things I used to do that I was unconscious of what I was doing. Something I would repeatedly say would be in terms of, and repeat that over and over again. Or I might say, okay, there might be certain things that I do repeatedly at the same time. So what are the tips you can give us on verbal tics like that?
Yeah. Let's jump immediately to the exercise because I love that you found the workbook nature of this book so useful. I mean, you already referenced ripping out pages and doing the activities, and I love that because my hope for this book is that people use it just like that, a how-to manual or a recipe book, a cookbook, and they flip through and they grab the exercise or the tool that's useful for them and they use it. So the exercise for this is called finger walking, and it's in the chapter on articulateness. And the way it works is that I have people walk their fingers across a table or desk, and they choose each and every single word that comes out of their mouth as they do. Now, if your listeners happen to be watching this clip on YouTube, you can see me doing it right now. If you're just listening, that's fine too. What I'm using my fingers for is a fancy term called embodied cognition. I'm helping my brain by using my body. And I walk each and every single finger step forward as specifically as possible, sort of like a ballerina tiptoeing through a field of tulips and trying not to disturb a single tulip. Now, I actually created this exercise as a standing one, where you stand in the room, you walk across a line of masking tape or a balance beam. And in fact, I even did this on an interview on Good Morning America recently, where I had the host of the TV show walk on a balance beam. But the reason to use the fingers is because it's very contained. And in fact, you can even do that exercise without anyone knowing when you're remote. When you have that digital cloak of invisibility, no one can see your hand. And what this exercise does is bring a hyper focus to the words you're choosing, as opposed to all that thought suppression, obsessing about the words you're trying to avoid.
Another aspect to this is the Lego drill. So there's something associated with that. No, I tried this recently in a workshop. I had it using a leadership development workshop, and we tried to bring in that executive presence so people could communicate with that presence. And this was so powerful. Can you tell us about this Lego drill? It's brilliant for coaches out there as well if you want to read this book.
Well, I'm going to reverse the direction of this and put it back to you. You tell me what happened in the workshop. Why was it brilliant and powerful in the workshop? What happened?
So the Lego drill, what I understood from the book is you take one piece of the build and you point to that or you lift it up. All you do is talk about that piece. So what it does, it naturally brings you to slow you down, and you the one word to describe this, what is that? And it allows you to really be present in the moment. And it's something to do with the human, the bone to brain connection, where you're pointing out one word and that's your focus. And then it just allows you to flow with the language, allows you to be more articulate, and allows you to express yourself in a way that really communicates what you want to convey. Does that make
Yeah.
sense to you? Mm.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, but I'm thrilled. Here's what I mean. I'm not surprised that that worked. I've been in this field for almost 20 years. I invented this drill 15 years ago, and it tends to be really powerful for people. And that's not to brag about me. It really is to brag about the importance of what this unlocks for people, what you discovered, which is I'll teach the drill in a second, but what's so remarkable about what you said is that the core root of the word executive presence, which you talked about, is presence. And the core root of that word is present. And this drill allows people to be present because what it helps them do is be in one idea at a time. Not 3, not 15, not thinking about all the stuff that you should say or all the mistakes that you made and all the stuff you shouldn't have said in the past. It forces you to be in the present moment, sharing one idea at a time. So I'm elated that you found that helpful. The way it works is this: you get a stack of Lego blocks, you share one idea at a time. To force you to do that, before you begin, you pick up the first Lego block. Once you have the Lego block in the air, you can say only your first idea. You can think of this like your first sentence. And then at the end of that idea, in silence, you put the Lego block down. Remaining silent, you pick up the second Lego block and you say your second idea. You could also think of this as your second sentence, of course, but humans don't think in sentences, we think in thoughts. So you say your second thought. At the end of that thought, in silence, kind of like where the period would go at the end of the sentence, you put the second Lego down, but you build it on the first. So you click it in place. And that clicking, of course, takes a moment. It takes a little bit of time. Same thing for the third thought. Silence until you pick up the block. Say your third idea at the end of that idea. Click the Lego block in place with the previous. And you keep doing that, building your ideas thought by thought by thought. In those Lego stacks, what happens is a tiny miracle. You give your brain time to operate. You give your brain a moment to say, what should I say next? And or, am I done? Did I say what needed to be said? And very often what happens is this drill makes people dramatically more concise, because all of a sudden they realize they don't need 15 ideas, they just need 3, as an example.
And that brings me to mind then is that some people might over prepare or over polish. And then the opposite of that is some people might under prepare. So, what comments do you have on that for people? What advice might you give them?
Yeah, for certain. I'm glad you brought up the word preparation, because I should have clarified something, folks. Both of the exercises I just mentioned, they're really practice exercises. I know when you're, in a boardroom or in an interview or giving a big presentation, you can't stack Lego blocks. It would look very
Yeah.
strange indeed. This is a drill to build muscle memory, to break bad habits that you've been in for your lifetime about rushing and never being able to tolerate silence. And this drill can change that almost instantly. But then you have to practice it enough that you build some muscle memory. And the finger walking is similar in that it's a practice drill as well. You can kind of cheat and do it when you're remote, but I want you to think of these as exercises to build strong communication muscles. And then soon enough, those muscles are there, those habits are there, and you have new skills. Back to your point about over preparing, under preparing. The people who often say, I don't want to sound rehearsed or over prepared, a lot of the time it's just a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And they don't want to prepare, either because they, feeling a little lazy that week and they don't want to, or they're procrastinating because it feels a little bit exposing or a little uncomfortable to have to face the fact that you're not ready. And so therefore people often blow it off and they just wing it. And this has some costs. So the first thing is this: if you say to yourself, I don't want to be over rehearsed, I don't want to over prepare, be honest with yourself and ask yourself, is that true, or is that just a defense mechanism? For the folks who actually over prepare, interestingly, it's not that they've over prepared the content. What they likely have done is over rehearsed the delivery. What is content? What is delivery? Content is the words that you say. Delivery is how you say those words. And I ask people to do this in the book, but you can also do this right now and remember those two distinctions for the rest of your life, which is if you put your hands up in front of your face, like you're holding binoculars, you'll look at your left hand and you'll see it looks like the letter C, and your right hand looks like the outer half of a capital D. C, the left hand, stands for content. D, the right hand, stands for delivery. Content is your words. Delivery is everything besides your words. When people over prepare, what has happened is that they have memorized the delivery. And I'll say the same thing 3 times in a row and you'll get my point. What has happened is they have memorized the delivery. What has happened is they have memorized the delivery. What has happened is they have memorized the delivery. Now, folks, do not be tempted to fast forward. That was not a glitch. I actually said the same thing 3 times in a row so you could hear identical delivery. This is what actors call a line reading, in which you say the same thing the same way every single time. And what happens if you do that is that when you then give the presentation or the large format talk or high stakes communication scenario, you sound like a robot because you have memorized the inflection. So what is the fix to all of this? The fix is this: prepare as much as you want on the content. Learn your stuff forwards and backwards. But when you practice in a varied and free way. So practice the delivery differently. Don't say it the same darn way every single time. And what will happen then is you will get familiar and more familiar with the ideas, but you will not lock yourself into a rigid sort of performance loop in which you can only say things one way.
So going back to being prepared, and then we have the silence, and naturally part of that you said was muscle memory. Now, part of muscle memory then is the way that we breathe, and you say this in the book that we have baggage when it comes to breathing. So if somebody says, "Just breathe," people go, or they hold their breath, or they're just trying to get everything out, like verbal diarrhea, and they're gonna go, and it feels like in the book, what I remembered is it feels like you're drowning. Then, you're gasping for air. So how do we how do we get used to putting air into action, as you say in the book?
Yeah. Thank you for using the phrase. Everybody listening, that is the phrase, put air into action. And I suggest you replace that phrase on top of all the instruction you've ever had about breathing, because breathing for speaking is not the same thing as breathing for stress relief or breathing for meditation or for yoga or any sports kind of practice or even for health. Breathing for speaking is to put air into action, to get your ideas across to somebody else. You are a musical instrument, whether you know it or not. In fact, you're a woodwind. You have a reed in your throat, like a clarinet or a saxophone, and you put air over that reed using your lungs and your diaphragm, and it picks up sound. And then that sound gets amplified throughout your entire body, and then it gets altered with the miracle of enunciation in your mouth, where your tongue and your soft palate and your jaw and your lips all work together to alter the sound. So when we're talking about breath as it applies to communication, you are in fact putting air into action. I'm I'm such a zealot about that phrase because, to your point, a lot of people, when they hear just breathe, breathe, take a breath, just take a breath, what happens instantly is they just feel terrible about themselves. They think, oh God, I'm such a stress case. Oh, I stress so much. Oh, I never learned to breathe. How can I not breathe? What a mess I am that I can't even do the most basic of activities that ensure my survival, breathing. So instead, I want you to think about putting air into action. Now, the fun part about this is you already know how to do it. You breathe flawlessly when you're not thinking about it. So, what you have to do is escape the sort of mental obsessiveness and instead unleash your body to do what it knows how to do. And I won't get into every exercise in the book that unlocks this because there's a lot of them, but they include
Yeah.
blowing up an imaginary balloon, playing a woodwind or a brass
Yeah.
instrument, an activity called silent storytelling. They're all useful for this same purpose.
All excellent exercises, I must say. Now, there's something you just said earlier on that your breathing is like a musical instrument, and that brings me to the notion of vocal variety. You spoke about vocal variety in the book because you alluded to that earlier on when you practice that you have that vocal variety in your delivery. So can you tell us a little bit about how was that broken down, the vocal variety, so I do not sound like a robot? I'm not monotone. And one thing I might add before you go into that is I love the piece in the book where you talk about the wavelengths of people saying because you can measure your monotone. And for me, how I learned about this is when I was editing the podcast a couple of years ago before Ashing joined the team. I could actually spot my ums on a wavelength, and you have a picture of this in the book. And I was just laughing to myself, going, "This is so true." So vocal variety. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to give you the drill right away so you
Mm,
can unlock how to do it better. And then we should do a deep dive in vocal
yeah.
variety because it's a worthwhile topic. So here's the best exercise I've ever created to unlock vocal variety. Ironically, it has nothing to do with sound to begin with. It's called silent storytelling. And what you do is you exaggerate all the physical aspects of your delivery. You open your mouth more. You enunciate so forcefully as though someone could read your lips. if you were muted on a television or something. You use your hands as expressively as possible to tell the story of what you're speaking about, and you allow your face to be as expressive as possible too, so that people can read how you feel about what you're saying. You can think of this like turning up the volume on every single part of your communication except for the sound, because you're not letting sound come out of your body. Essentially, it's like lip syncing, okay? You're
Yeah.
mouthing words, but being as expressive physically as you possibly can. Do that for several minutes. So much so that someone who didn't speak your native language could maybe understand you just by watching you, okay? Then once you've done that for a couple minutes, add sound back into the mix. You can now allow sound to come out of your body. You can allow your vocal cords to vibrate. But here's the crucial thing. You're not allowed to let the rest of your physical communication instrument collapse and contract. You have to keep moving your hands. You have to keep really expressively and dynamically articulating your words. And what you're going to see instantly is that all of a sudden your voice springs to life and flies out of you with tons of vocal variety. And here is why. Your voice is your body. I'll say that again. Your voice is your body. So if you use your body in much more dynamic ways, what you're doing is activating the musical instrument that is your body, and the voice will move much more too. So that's the exercise. And I want to pause there for a second, and then we can do a whole deep dive on vocal variety if you want to.
Yeah. How about we skip vocal variety just for a second? Because a thought popped into my head. You're telling me to use my voice as my body and also to keep a lot of movement. Now, there's some people listening in here. Hold on here now, Michael. I've been told to keep my hands down by my side, and some people ask me so many times what I do with my hands. And I had a guest on before. Her name was Annie Murphy Paul, and she is the author of The Extended Mind. It's a book based on neuroscience, how to extend the powers of your brain. And she said hand movements actually allow you to improve your cognition, improve the way you process. So there's two schools of thought there. So what's your take on things? Should we use movement to communicate or hand movement? What do I do with my hands?
First of all, I'm going to read her book because I am not a neuroscientist. I am a
Yeah,
specialist in speaking, but I have
yeah.
seen firsthand, anecdotally, over the decade plus I've been in this industry, that there is this deep, deep, deep neurological connection between how you get people to use their bodies and the words that come flying out of their mouth. And very often, what I'm trying to do is help people unlock a virtuous cycle in which how they're using their physical and vocal communication instrument helps them come across much, much better. But not just that, it actually helps them choose smarter words. So I will read her book closely and see what I can learn with that. As a segue into it, yes, let me be a heretic and say some truly heretical things for those who have been the victim of the thought suppression school of hand gestures. Now, I promise, if you have heard that you should not move your hands too much, you probably have dozens of don'ts in your head. Don't make distracting hand gestures. Don't jangle the coins in your pockets. Don't cross your hands in front of you. Don't cross your arms. That looks defensive. Don't point at your audience. That can be confrontational. Don't hide your hands behind your back. That looks like you're hiding something. Don't keep your hands constrained at your sides because it looks like they're like penguin flippers or something like this. I mean, I'm getting ridiculous with the number of these that there are. That's the whole point. With all those don'ts, what the heck are you supposed to do with your hands? I'm not suggesting that folks need to layer on countless unnecessary gestures, like you're shellacking this on to the outside of you. What I'm really suggesting is there's a very good chance that you, whoever you are listening to this, move your hands a lot more than you think when you're not even thinking about your communication, but you're simply thinking about helping your message reach the other person. So I'm not saying you have to move your gestures more than that, but I am saying when you're presenting or giving a large high stakes communication event of some kind, why on earth Would you constrain yourself in a deeply artificial way in comparison to how you actually speak when you're at your best? And so the silent storytelling activity, in a way, it's a hack to unlock more vocal variety. So it can be thought of as simply a practice exercise for vocal variety. But it can also be very powerful for the people who have been the victim of this sort of advice. Don't make distracting hand gestures, because it helps them unleash their hands, because in fact, their hands might have a story to tell too.
So let's return to vocal variety. I distracted you with what to do with my hands
Very effective.
very effectively. Vocal variety. Tell me more. You break this down in the book.
You have to promise that you're going to interrupt me anytime you want to in this answer, okay?
I will do.
Because legitimately, I could do a whole podcast just on vocal variety. And in fact, as you read, it is the longest chapter in the whole book.
So
Not long because it's boring, long because it's that important.
I love the fact that you go into so much detail. So even if you were to give us the list of things, and really what I'd like to do as part of this podcast is to make sure people actually, if they're really interested in this, pick up this book. I have learned so much from this book. If I'm honest, it's done in a way that you said, I forget the phrase you said, you're going to be a trustworthy narrator.
Mhm.
I think is that the preface. I can't remember. It
You
is
you got
very
it. Trustworthy narrator, yes.
it is very entertaining. So with this, can you just give us the breakdown? Because we talked about enunciation and we talked about articulation a little bit. Like what are the different
Yeah.
elements?
Yeah. Okay, you got it. We'll go through this systematically. I'll give you
Yeah.
the 5 P's of vocal variety,
Okay.
what they are.
Mm.
Then I'll tell you why they matter.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to tell you the bell curve that they exist on. And then I'll throw out one last way to get better at vocal variety.
Do I interrupt you now? That's too early.
Yeah, go ahead. Interrupt away. Go ahead.
I'm joking. I'm just about to say the listeners are in for a treat now. Okay, off you go.
Okay, here we are. I did not invent vocal variety. Humans have used vocal variety as long as we've been human. I did invent the naming system you're about to learn to make it alliterative and therefore hopefully easy to remember. Pace, pitch, pause, power, and placement. Pace is speed. That means fast and slow. Pitch is the note on a musical scale, high or low. Pause is simply silence. Power is another word for volume. So that means loud and quiet. And placement means where is the sound placed in your body. The most cliche one, of course, is if you have a really nasal voice, then what's happening is a sound is amplifying only in the front of your face, the sinuses, the mask of your face. You get the idea. Those are the 5 dynamics of vocal variety. These are essential. You know why? Vocal variety helps us accomplish multiple things, like 1, convey meaning. If I say to you, please pick up the red book, well, now you know automatically there's also a blue book and a black book, perhaps. That's meaning. Convey emotion. If you've ever misread a text message, which is the example I use in the book, and you thought the person sending the text message was furious with you, and they weren't at all, what happened was you heard their voice in your mind with faulty vocal variety, and you thought therefore they were furious. It helps you orient your audience to what's important, priority, chronology, as an example. And then, most important of all, it helps you surprise your audience. Because when we hear a monotone, what we do is we go to sleep. We hear a pattern that we can predict into infinity. And since we can predict it, we don't have to pay attention to it anymore. Those are the purposes of vocal variety. This is the bell curve. More vocal variety is not always better, but it's usually better. Because typically when people are under stress, what they do is contract and use less. They go into fight, flight, or freeze, and they freeze, which means they don't breathe as much and their voice becomes monotone. But it does exist on a bell curve. On one side, you have constancy. That means continual sound that never changes. On the other extreme, though, you have chaos. And that would mean vocal variety that is so random or arbitrary, you can't even make sense of what's being said. And I'll do this now in a ludicrous way, just so you hear. If someone used totally inappropriate and strange vocal variety, we would be concerned about them, in fact. And we'd have a very hard time deciphering what they were saying. But in between these two ridiculous extremes of constancy and chaos, you have coherence. And that's what you're aiming for, coherence. Now, the final thing I'll say on vocal variety to try to hammer home this point about how much it matters is that some colleagues and I at Columbia Business School, UCLA, University of Chicago, and other places used these P's to examine politicians' speeches and assess what the impact was on an audience. And I'll give you the spoiler of the whole thing. Politicians who used vocal variety were perceived more positively than those who didn't. And even more importantly, they were thought of as more authentic. That's probably not a huge surprise to you. If you hear a politician droning on in a monotone, you probably think they're inauthentic. So that's a primer on vocal variety. If you want to go a lot deeper, though, as I said, it is the longest chapter in the book, and it is a worthwhile read.
The most common thing, Michael, that I'm asked is how do I deal with nerves?
Mm.
An aspect of the book that you talk about then as well is being confident is one thing, projecting confidence is different. So there's really two questions there. So first of all, handling nerves. How do we handle nerves?
The way you handle them, folks, is go to don'tsayum.com and download the nerves chapter for free. It's free there. I'm going to keep it free there forever, whether or not
Yeah.
people buy the book, because I really do have a bit of a mission, which is that I want to give people who maybe even have had lifetime struggles with nerves a better antidote than what they've typically received. So the short answer is go to don'tsayum.com, download the free nerves chapter, and read it for yourself.
Yeah.
But now let's get into your question, and I'll answer it more explicitly, and then also get into confidence.
Mm.
So, in terms of nerves, most of the conventional wisdom people have received is terrible. And it often features verbs that are about opposition. Battle your nerves, defeat your nerves, conquer your nerves. But back to the idea of thought suppression, nerves are very much like misbehaving children. The more attention you give to the misbehavior, often the worse it gets. So what you're really looking for is what I call distance and distraction. You don't want to make the voices go away because that's not going to work. You want to get distance from the voices. And how do you get distance? By giving yourself a useful distraction. But it can't just be a distraction. It has to be useful. And here's a perfect point of this. A lot of people get this advice about their nerves. Just imagine your audience in their underwear. And this is supposed to give people a little bit of a transgressive secret. Like,
Yeah.
ooh, I can imagine them all in this vulnerable situation. It brings
Yeah.
some humor to my life, and therefore I get some ease and some relaxation to continue. But it typically doesn't work for people because really all you're doing is making people multitask. And our brains are terrible at multitasking. So you try to remember to think about people in their underwear, but then wait, what was I talking about? So it tends not to be very useful advice at all. The distraction has to be useful. And, in the chapter, I go into much more detail about how to find one of these useful distractions. But the quick version is basically you have to rely on your body. So find something, whether it's enunciation, grounding your feet, freedom and ease in hand gestures. Maybe it's vocal variety, maybe it's breath. You find something very physical to focus on, and then you let that carry you, and you focus on that like it's your job, which it is. So that's a quick condensed version of the nerves idea.
Something that I've learned over the years is to meet with members of the audience first and shake hands with people. And a part of that, it's when dealing with nerves. Sometimes it's a subconscious fear that's going on, like a fear of rejection or different things like that that might happen. And then once I know that I have a couple of friends in the audience, for me it just relaxes a little bit. It's something to do with the physical act of shaking hands with people.
Ah,
And again, it's building that connection and rapport early then for me, and that kind of sets me up for success. So sometimes a little thing like that I know that people are not judging me in any way, that they're there to listen. I have something of value to offer. And I think it's about taming those gremlins in your head to go, oh, hold on here, just be curious about that thought. And that's what I like about your approach then. It's that distancing really allows people to go, hold on here, is this objective? Is it real? Is it irrational? And then it's actually making friends with that to say, actually, this is designed to protect me. And this is something else that you said in the book. Now, I'm going to misquote here, but
yeah.
the general gist is what you think is protecting you is actually putting you into danger. I may have messed that up,
Not
but
much. That's almost word for word. Good job.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So tell me about that, because sometimes it's a behavior. So, for example, when people cross their armchair, they do too tight with crossing their arms. Um, that's breath suppression then, and that's making it even worse then by crossing your arms tightly, and then you can't breathe properly,
Yeah.
and then you're into that CBT model where it's thoughts, emotions, physical feelings that you get caught into a vicious circle. And so there is something to that self-reflection piece, and this is why I think it's really good for listeners to download that chapter for free. It's something that I've learned from your thoughts. Is there any of your practices that you use quite regularly?
Yeah. There's a bunch we have to unpack now because we should
Yeah,
circle back to your question about confidence eventually.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And
yeah,
let's talk about your sort of handshaking process because there's a lot to
yeah,
unpack there as well. And then
yeah,
we'll get to your last question here.
yeah.
We'll get to confidence in a couple minutes. Remind me on that one, okay?
Okay,
But I
okay.
love your ritual is what it is really. And I love it for a bunch of reasons. And then I want to offer a humorous, what would be the right word for it? A humorous counterpoint to what you're doing.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah,
So, first of all, I love that it's a ritual. It's a thing you do, kind of like an athlete warming up or a
yeah.
regimen that you do regularly. I love that there's a handshake to it because you said there's even something about shaking the hand. You're right. What does that do? Well, probably it loosens you up physically. Your
Mm,
arm shakes a little bit. You have to probably smile to look at the person. That arm shaking moves your elbow, elbow moves the shoulder, shoulder moves the rib cage. Moving of the rib cage invites your lungs to expand and take air into
mm,
your body. So, all of that is probably very powerful for you. Keep doing it. And I also love that you found something concrete, a
mm,
behavior that you do, as opposed to just staying stuck in the head and being the victim of thought suppression. You have created for yourself a regimen. That's all
mm.
amazing. Now, here's the humorous counterpoint. For some people, that would make them worse
Yes.
because some people would think, oh God, now I know these people and they're really judging me. And some people, they feel complete freedom and license if the audience is totally anonymous because they think like, who cares? They're not going to judge me. They don't even know me. Who cares?
Yeah.
But for other people, anonymous strangers, like for you, actually increases the experience of nerves because there's no intimacy, there's no connection.
Mm,
Now, I point that out because for a lot of people, this idea can be incredibly liberating. If you're listening to this, you probably have some what I call mythical ifs. Okay. And the if is like, if I dot, 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 then I'm good. If I dot, 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 then I'm bad. And I say they're mythical because they might not be true. They might be just
yeah.
arbitrary distinctions in your head. Like, if I know my audience, I'm good. If there's strangers judging me, I'm bad. If I'm remote, I'm good. If I'm in person, I'm bad. Or reverse. If I'm in person, I'm good. If I'm remote, I'm bad. And
Mm,
we have these distinctions. And I gently implore you, audience, to question those a little bit because they may be entirely arbitrary. So I'll leave that discussion at that. But for you, keep up the handshaking because it sounds like A, it's working, and B, there's a whole bunch of great side impacts or side effects of that happen also. So good for you. I give you full blessing on that one. All right, keep it up,
I'm going to talk about confidence now. Before I talk about confidence, I'm going to tell people a little bit more about my rituals, if that's okay. What
please.
I what I do is I limit my coffee intake the day before and the day of. I make sure I have a good night's sleep, and I also reduce my sugar intake completely beforehand. And these are things that just maybe the little things that make a big difference for my performance and my delivery. And this is what you talked about, your content and your delivery. And this is something that really works for me. So let's move into confidence then.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us
Sure.
more about that. Because we were talking about projecting confidence and maybe not feeling confidence. There might be a subtle difference.
There's a lot of chapters in the book and pages in the book in which I try to undermine what I think is really poor conventional wisdom. And none of the subjects that I do that in the book do I do it as forcefully as I do this idea of confidence, because it tends to be the thing that messes people up brutally, and they're completely misguided about it. They think it is an end to itself that they're in pursuit of, and they think if they don't have this holy grail of confidence, they will never achieve their hopes and dreams. And it becomes a deeply self defeating cycle because the script would go something like this: I just wasn't confident. And if I can be confident, then I can. Oh, I wasn't confident enough. I just didn't feel that confidence. God, next time I gotta just like build up my confidence. And if I feel confident, then I'm gonna do well. But the problem is, in many of these situations, you're under a tremendous amount of stress. You probably are in an intense cycle of adrenaline. Your body might even be in fight, flight, or freeze. You're probably not going to feel confident. And even the idea that that is a goal to be pursued is flawed, in my opinion. One achieves confidence not by hunting for it, chasing it. One achieves confidence by building skill, by a demonstrated track record of success that you can rely on. And from that, that's actually what provides the confidence. So if it's fun, audience, what about contemplating the idea of releasing yourself from the obligation of confidence? What about releasing yourself from the hunt, the pursuit, the quest for confidence? What about embracing the idea that you'll never get there? You will never slay the mythical confidence beast that is running away from you and you're hunting it. Give it up. And instead, examine what are the behaviors of confidence that help you project confidence. But amazingly, if you do them long enough, they actually begin to fuel real confidence. So here's how to do that. Figure out what you do when you are at your most other focused best. That means not thinking about you and being self obsessed and self conscious and self focused about how you're presenting in that moment. No, when you're trying to reach a friend and really help them in a situation of maybe even crisis, how do you move your hands? How do you use eye contact to learn about them? How do you slow your voice at times to make sure they can digest what you're saying? How do you take care with your enunciation to make sure you're understood? Notice what those behaviors are. And then, instead of worrying about confidence, just get better at doing those behaviors. And you will build a muscle memory of using what I call the behaviors of confidence to communicate well, even when you don't feel confident at all.
This is something another guest spoke about, Sally Helgeson, and we talked about imposter syndrome and
Mm-hmm.
confidence. And the advice she talked to me about in that podcast was focus on competence, not
Mm.
confidence. And I think that's really what you're doing here is focus behaviors, focus on what you're going to do well and focus what you're going to include. And then that brings me to mind of you use a lot of ifs there. That brought to mind conditional language.
Hmm. Yeah.
And these are the sometimes things that we use as crutches to our filler language. I can't believe we didn't even go there. And it's in the title. Oh my God. Here we are.
Yeah.
So just tell us about that conditional language. These are the filler words, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, for sure. Let's break it down a little bit. But first,
Mm,
actually, let me reference the author you mentioned. I've been banging this drum about confidence for almost 2 decades now, but it's beginning to get more and more purchase. And I'm thrilled to see that many people are talking now about how maybe that's not
yeah.
the goal that we should be pursuing. And the only thing I will add to that is my hope for this book is that people take that new mindset, but then they go even farther and they actually practice these exercises. So they enlist their bodies and they develop their embodied cognition as a way to make that mission manifest, meaning it is the way to focus on competence versus confidence. Develop competence in the muscle memory of how you speak, your enunciation, your vocal variety, your posture, your gestures, all those things. Become competent in those things. And that can replace that mythical quest for confidence. But I'm just excited about the books you've been mentioning. So I had to say that. Yes, let's jump into filler. Do you want to say something though?
Yeah, something you were saying there, and I recall in the book. Then it's really about it's a habit. It will stick in a while. So really, what we're going to go into next is really about we talk about conditional language. A part of that to improve that is linguistic precision. I believe is what you said, and that for me is whether I'm training coaches or mediators. I also have a mediation training company. And really, what we do is sometimes we talk about the art of reframing, and people say, well, this is clunky or, this is unnatural. And people tend to use these conditional filler words. And really, you're stating this is just another skill to be learned when it comes to linguistic precision. Did I capture that correctly?
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
mm,
Yeah. Let's put conditional language, like you were just referencing, as a subheading under the idea of filler.
mm.
And conditional language is usually language that diminishes things. So that's kinda, sorta, just, little, I think, those sorts of words. And the criteria that I offer in the book for people to consider am I using this word as filler or not? Are these two criteria. One, are you aware you're doing it? And number two, is it grammatically necessary? And if the answer to both of those questions is no, then that word, whatever it is in fact for you filler. And I'll give you the funny example, the most funny example. I worked with someone one time who used the word viscerally as a filler word. Like every second or third sentence, viscerally got thrown in there. And this person had no idea that they were doing it. So, one, it was not grammatically necessary. In fact, it didn't even fit in the sentence. Number two, he was not aware he was doing it. So for him, that word was in fact filler. The conditional words you're talking about, kinda, sorta, little, just, many times we don't even know we're throwing them in there. And yes, if you're in a situation like mediation, like you're talking about, in which your words really matter, and in fact they might be deciphered, those diminishing words can really negatively impact what you're saying. So what to do about them? Well, it's the same exercise I said earlier about finger walking, except for you're focused on those words as opposed to the ums and the uhs. The other drill, by the way, that can also work for this is silent storytelling that I said earlier. And here's why. If you're that focused on enunciating your words so that someone watching on silent could lip read every single thing that you're saying, guess what your brain does a really good job of? Choosing words. Because it knows it has to, in an exaggerated way, mouth these words so clearly that someone else could lip read them. And so therefore your brain tends not to say just, little, kind of, sort of, just, kind of, sort of, kind of, kind of, sort of, just. So that's another great exercise to unlock the topic that you mentioned, which is linguistic precision.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of the podcast, and this is a very common question, and I wanted to make sure that I cover this. Oftentimes I get this question is, how long does it take to master this? Such a tough question. How long is a piece of string in my mind? What's your response?
Yeah. I actually don't think it's that tough of a question.
Mm.
I think there's some math we could put to this actually. But the tough question is the more existential one that you're hinting at, which is ultimately you're never done mastering your communication. I hope a gift for everyone listening is that you get better and better and better at communicating throughout your entire life because you take even more of an interest in helping those around you by using your words and your voice and your body to try to reach them. And hopefully you don't reach a plateau at which you're, no, I'm this good and I'm just going to stay here forever. So when do you master it? I don't know. Hopefully never. Hopefully you never master this stuff. But now the simpler answer, which is how quickly can you get facile at this stuff or competent? Quickly. You can learn one of these exercises and see noticeable improvement in that given thing instantly. I mean, 15 minutes. And that's not to brag about my book. It's to remind you that we know how to do this in life. Meaning, if you were trying to learn how to do a new recipe, you could learn the thing in 15 minutes. Now, you're going to have to practice it a long time to get better at it, but you could learn it instantly. Same with an athletic change or approach to a technique. Then you can learn it instantly. You can build a new habit within about 90 days. About 3 months of doing these exercises, you will be able to communicate like the best version of yourself. But at that point, you'll probably still have to think about it. You will be in the category of what's called consciously skilled. When I focus on it, I can perform measurably better.
Mm.
But then, how long till it turns into a muscle memory habit? You don't even have to think about it anymore. Depends for different people, but somewhere between the 6-month to 12-month kind of range. So if you do this a lot for a year, you're going to be a changed communicator in these given habits. Now, that sounds like a long time, everybody. I can hear you almost being discouraged already. It's not. Let me give you a counterpoint. How long have you been trying to improve by telling yourself something utterly worthless like slow down? Just slow down. Just slow down. Slow down. Slow down. I shouldn't talk so fast. Just slow down. Just slow down. Don't talk too fast. Don't talk too fast. Just slow down. Slow down. Slow down. Just slow down. Maybe years, people. Maybe decades even. So this is eminently learnable stuff, but you have to learn it in the right way.
This is the value the book brings, is the amount of exercises. And you have another exercise of where people record themselves using video. One time before, this was something that didn't happen that often because people didn't have access to cameras, and now we have mobile phones, very easy to do. So I thoroughly encourage people to read this book. Michael, we're coming to the end of the podcast. If people were to find more about you and what you do, how might they do so?
Sure. Well, the book website is super simple. It's don'tsayum.com. If you want to get in touch with my company's name is GK Training, and that URL is also very simple. It's just gktraining.com. And then if you want to reach out to me, LinkedIn is the best place to do so.
Michael, thank you so much for joining the Workplace Podcast.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thanks so much for listening to the Workplace Podcast. I really appreciate you being part of the conversation. If you found value in today's episode and want to support what we're building here, you'll find a link to our Patreon in the description. As a workplace expert, I'm here to help you resolve your workplace dilemmas. If your organization could benefit from my expertise, feel free to get in touch via our website, yellowwood.ie. Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner. Take a different path to success in your career, leadership, team, and organization. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you soon.